Hey, everybody, welcome to Crackpot, the podcast where each and every week we dive into a different conspiracy theory and we discuss the merits or the demerits of each. We're your hosts. I'm Tim.
And I'm Zach.
And how are you, Zach?
Dude, I'm liking the new setup.
It's nice. Seems like every other month we have a new studio. That's not true.
Well, yeah, actually, maybe it is. Just kidding. We are on Studio A99, I think,
Yeah, something
already.
like that.
We need a cool name for this studio.
Studio A24.
Yeah. Anyways, yeah, so folks, number one, we're doing some more video content.
Yeah, check it out.
Check out the YouTube page, channel, whatever.
Yeah.
Do we have a channel?
We
will.
Kind
if we
of,
don't. Yeah.
sort of, yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So,
It's
actually,
the best channel that exists.
Yeah, it's almost as big as Mr. Beast's.
Yeah, it's neck and neck.
Which is tight.
Yeah.
Anyway, so if you are listening to the show via the traditional, I was going to say snail mail, but I guess that's
The snail mail version of podcast.
Yeah. Which I still prefer, to be totally frank with all of you. But if you're not, if you're like a Gen Z, whatever, younger, you're into more video stuff, check out the YouTube channel.
I think we'll have them on Instagram.
Yeah, Instagram, the website, folks. We are doing a blog.
Check out the website.
We've got actual merch. And by the way, it actually works.
Yeah.
It took me 7 years to figure this out. With no help from my co-host.
No, well, I had no help to offer. So
You still had, okay, anyways, I'll get your
I
password
still had
later.
plenty of advice to give.
Yeah.
Direction.
No shortage of advice on what I could be doing in my free time. But anyways, yeah, so check out, there's a lot of stuff happening here, which is great. I know we're still putting content out on a regular basis, so that's super fun, but also some new stuff that's coming down the pipe.
Check it out.
So anyways.
What does that have to do with plasma?
Are we talking about plasma?
Plasma. Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, today we're talking about plasma.
What is it? No one knows.
So, plasma,
Yes.
not the stuff in your blood, which makes up 55% of your blood with the yellowish hue in it. Do you ever do
Okay.
plasma sales in college?
No,
Make a little scratch?
No, I went abroad and I couldn't donate for a couple of years. They have a restriction. Like, I got to do this now.
Yeah.
Like, no, that's I can't.
No. Now you can.
I have to look into that. No, there's a restraint on how, like, when you're abroad a certain amount of time and you can't. Yeah,
I think they lifted some of those. Anyway, that's not what we're talking. We're not talking about blood.
Yeah.
Unless you want to. I don't know. Okay. We'll hold that for later.
Yeah, we'll
the
save
second
that for
half.
the spectacular show.
We're talking about the fourth state of matter. Zach, what are the states of matter?
Earth, wind, fire,
That's right.
plasma.
Wait, no.
I actually forget. I did know some of these. At one point.
Solid,
Solid, liquid,
liquid,
mass, gas. Solid, liquid, gas, and then plasma.
plasma.
Yeah,
Exactly.
right.
So what is plasma? You want me to tell you?
I think it's in my TV also.
Right. So plasma, like I said, fourth state of matter. So it is charged gases that are created when electrons are freed from gas atoms.
Okay, that kind of makes sense.
Kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's electrons, gas electrons that get separated from that. And plasma is made up of ions, electrons, and neutral atoms. And we've all seen those little balls, where you touch it and the little thing shoots out.
Oh, like you see
Like
them
in a science
museums,
yeah.
or like in the cool physics professor's room. They put the hand on it, the stuff kind of shoots out. Yeah.
Yeah, that thing.
Yeah.
So that's actually plasma.
Okay.
So what's funny, my daughter went to third grade science. What was that, 3 years ago or whatever?
Yeah.
And they were learning about the different states of matter.
Okay.
She's like, Dad, 3 states of matter. Solid, liquid, gas. I'm like, well, yeah, that's right. But there's 4.
Ooh.
She's like, what? They didn't tell me about 4. I'm like, there's 4. Plasma. Go tell your teacher. She came home. She was so upset. She's like, it's not real, Dad.
What?
My teacher said that's not real. It's not a state of matter. So I have it out for the Minneapolis public schools and their science curriculum.
That's actually highly questionable.
I know. Yeah. Anyway, but plasma makes up 99.9% of the observable universe.
Wow.
It's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
So it's the stars, our sun, obviously,
Yep.
and pretty much everything in between the planets and the other stars.
Yeah, sun's the dark matter, basically.
So anyway, but we are talking about plasma specifically in our atmosphere that behave kind of odd. And scientists are looking at it and they're like, what is this and why is it doing that?
Okay.
So let me just kind of start out here. So plasmas up to an entire kilometer long have been spotted behaving similarly to multicellular organisms and have been filmed on 10 separate NASA space shuttle missions.
So basically like a floating mass of plasma?
Exactly. It's like a big ball of light or gas or plasma.
Yeah, plasma. There you go. Right.
That is, they are up there in our thermosphere. So quick side comment here. So 5 different layers of the atmosphere, right? So there's the troposphere where we live. Then there's the stratosphere, which is about 5 to 9 miles above the Earth.
Okay.
As generally where you fly in airplanes.
Okay.
So also the ozone layer's in that level. So above that, about 31 miles up, is the mesosphere. And that goes up to about 50-ish. So from 50 to 440 miles above the Earth is the thermosphere.
Okay.
And that is where these plasma, I want to say, live.
Right.
But I'm reminded over and over again, reading the scientific material here, they're like, plasma is not alive. But here's 100 ways where it acts like a living thing.
Oh, that's weird. So there's basically a floating mass of plasma, way not in outer space necessarily,
Nope.
but like the upper
reaches of our
limits.
atmosphere.
Yeah,
Yep.
of our atmosphere. Okay. And it's just doing weird stuff?
It's doing weird stuff. So let me tell you a bit more about this. So they have different morphologies. So they can be in a cone shape, a cloud shape, a donut shape, or even a spherical or cylindrical shape. They've been filmed flying toward and descending from the thermosphere into thunderstorms.
Oh.
So they shoot out of the thermosphere, go straight down and like enter into a thunderstorm, and then shoot back up. And they've been filmed doing that, okay?
Okay.
They congregate by the hundreds and interact with satellites, generating electromagnetic activity. And we'll get into this in a bit more detail in a moment, oftentimes approach the space shuttles.
So, yeah, the way you're laying it out sounds like I have 2 different theories, both of which I assume are correct. Because I did pretty good in physics in high school.
Oh, well done.
Number one is that maybe like somehow like whatever is happening from like an electrical like charge standpoint with like lightning, maybe they're attracted to that. Like just by way of, I don't know, static electricity or something like that. Like that's kind of one thing. The other one is if it's like interacting somehow with satellites or whatever, it sounds like it actually might be sentient to some degree. Like not really, but maybe.
Okay, let me keep going here.
Okay.
So they have been able to follow these flight trajectories with the video and everything. So sometimes they shoot off in a direction and then change trajectory at a 45-degree angle or a 90-degree angle, sometimes a 180-degree angle, just completely reversing course. And they follow each other. They play like cat and mouse. It's actually referred to as hunter predatory behavior that these plasma engage in. They've been filmed accelerating, slowing down, stopping, congregating, and kind of this chase game where like one ball of plasma will chase around another one. Maybe it'll absorb it and then chase another one. Maybe the first one or the second one will absorb the first one.
Oh, weird.
And maybe they just shoot off in different directions. And the whole time they're basically just kind of leaving these plasma dust trails in their wake, like a little stream behind them.
Exhaust.
Yeah, kind of. And I just want to take a moment and say, why did no one tell me about this until now?
Yeah.
Like, how am I 42 and just realizing this?
Have you, like, I don't know if it's in your notes at all or saw it in the research, but, like, did they say when this was first observed or how long they've been seeing this?
Well, okay. So we're not 100% sure on that because if we now know that that exists, we can look back at historical events and start to say, oh, maybe that's what that is.
No way.
For example, do you remember when we did our episode about the Foo Fighters? Not Dave Grohl's band, but the actual World War II balls of light that were following these airplanes around.
That actually would make way too much sense.
Huh. So yeah, if you haven't heard this episode, go back 2018, March of 2018. We did an episode about a bunch of stuff, and we also talked about these Foo Fighters. But I mean, do you want to just kind of briefly mention what was going on?
Yeah, so during World War II, essentially pilots that were in combat observed these kinds of like orbs or balls of light or something that would follow their aircraft, kind of appear sometimes near the wings, trail them, go above them, below them, in front of them. Americans always thought it was the Germans.
Yes.
Germans thought it was the Americans. Nobody said anything until the war
Japanese
was
saw them,
done.
the Italians, the British, everyone saw them. Everyone assumed it was the other side.
Right.
And no one knew. I mean, to this day, like, it's still essentially unknown.
Yeah, and that, so to me, when I think about the things that are like as close as you can get to like objective, verified behavior that we could only assume is like something we don't understand, is like truly what Foo Fighters. That's like a huge, that's like one of the reasons to believe in UFOs, essentially.
Right.
There's that. This sounds a little bit too like this is kind of getting my head like the gears turning here. Well, think about all the weird celestial events that humans have seen for thousands of years.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So it's not that I want to like all of a sudden debunk every single UFO episode or UFO encounter we've ever talked about, but with this now being a real scientific phenomena, it's like, oh, maybe everything flying around, stopping, starting, shooting off in the sky is not an extraterrestrial spacecraft. Maybe it's just plasma from our atmosphere.
Well, it even gets me thinking, I know this sounds kind of bizarre, but we did 2-3 years ago maybe, like the Nuremberg,
the wood carving thing.
The celestial event. Oh my god. And it's like, well, maybe they were seeing the plasma and not like craft.
Yeah, that episode, was that a Patreon episode, or I forget.
I don't remember.
I'll see if I can put that in the show notes. But that, there's a famous wood carving. You've probably seen a reprint of it, but it's just like a city, a town.
A medieval town.
And then
Germany.
above the medieval town on this wood carving are just a bunch of arrows and circles and like little crosses. And there was a description of the events, and it happened over a course of several days, I think.
Yeah, it was like 3 days. And it was like, oh yeah, this is what we saw. This basically war in the air.
Yeah.
And it wasn't obviously...
Things were flying around.
Yeah.
Shooting off in different directions. We had no idea what was going on.
And there's still a wood carving to prove that it happened, but like we don't know what it was.
We don't know. But now I'm thinking, well, at the time of the recording of that episode, I'm like, well, that's obviously UFOs. That's obviously aliens. It's something, right?
Of course.
Because nothing else would be in the sky. And now it's like, oh... Maybe.
Who knows?
Maybe these balls of plasma drop below the thermosphere or were large enough for people to see or something along those lines.
Well, the thing is, too, and sorry, one last thought here is like, to me, it doesn't explain every potential UFO, UAP
Exactly. Yes,
situation.
and that's where I was going to go, yeah.
Yeah, but it could knock out a percentage of them for sure.
I think it actually could. We'll kind of talk about that as well. So... you mentioned, when did we first see them? So maybe we first saw these balls of plasma in the 40s. Maybe we first saw them in the 1600s when during that Nuremberg sighting. But these were first observed, at least in modern times, in the 1960s by U.S. astronauts.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow. So this has been known for decades.
Decades, yes.
Oh, see, I was thinking this was like, 2 years ago we saw
this is like 2 years ago they
Yeah.
decided, oh, wow, there's this new thing. No, it's been around.
Oh, dude, okay.
And no one told me? Come on, guys. Like, seriously. So they observed them in the 60s. They have videos and pictures and so on. Sometimes they are seen over nuclear facilities as well, which, again, UFOs hovering over nuclear sites.
Okay.
But again, if you talk about the ions and the charge of one versus the other, power plants, nuclear power plants, that kind of makes sense, I think.
Right.
So 1944, the New York Times wrote this about the Foo Fighter phenomenon. They said, quote, airmen of the American Air Force report that they are encountering silver-colored spheres in the air, either singly or in clusters. Sometimes they are semi-translucent. There was no information available as to what holds them up, like stars in the sky, what is in them, or what their purpose appears to be. So the old gray lady talking about these things.
That's right.
So I just don't know. But I mean, what we do know, you mentioned, of course, they were traveling incredibly fast. They were capable of amazing maneuvers and impossible turns, like we talk about UFOs doing as well.
Yeah.
And they would ride alongside, above, underneath, below, in front of these U.S. fighter planes. And they weren't able to shoot them down either, of course. So everyone was just left scratching their head like, what is going on?
And we still are, pretty much.
Pretty much. Another event that I don't think we've talked about on the show, but in May 1808 in Biskopsberga, Sweden. I think that's where your family's from.
The homestead, yeah.
Yeah, good. All right.
Shouts to my people in Dalsland, baby.
So all of a sudden, 1808 in Sweden there, the sky was rust red and filled with, quote, air bubbles and soap bubbles.
Oh, that's weird.
Is how they described it. Engaged in frenzied behavior. And these bubbles would speed up and slow down, and they would chase each other, and they would change color. One of them actually descended all the way to the ground, landed, laid completely flat, and then essentially like deflated like a balloon, became incredibly flat and thin, and then turned into like a cobweb and dried up and disintegrated.
Hey, wait a second. This is kind of out of left field. This reminds me a little bit of... Hasn't there been some talk about
the cobweb thing?
Yeah, the cobweb
thing. Yes.
Ooh.
We were talking about UFOs over schools.
Oh, no, that's what it was.
That was the episode. So UFOs over schools, and there was a UFO sighting. And I mean, that sighting was like a triangular craft.
Yeah, right.
It was like a real solid thing with lights and so on. So probably not a ball of plasma, I have to assume.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah. And then it touched down, and then it took off. And when it took off, there was like this cobweb layer on the ground.
That's exactly what it sounds like.
So
that's weird.
I don't know how the two are related, but they seem to be related.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Definitely they're related.
Other frequent locations where this plasma phenomenon occurs outside of the thermosphere are, believe it or not, Hiroshima, Nagasaki, and the Hellsdalen Valley in central Norway. Have you heard about this place? There's another. Add this to your list of episodes we should do. The Hestelen Lights have been observed in this valley in Norway since the 1930s. It's straight up like a mountain valley, right? And balls of light just shoot around the valley, and it's been there forever, and everyone knows about it, and everyone's like, what the H is this even? And now with this new information, people are like, okay, maybe, there's like they found like heavy deposits of quartz and certain minerals in the ground in the area, and maybe different I don't actually know what I'm talking about.
Crystals or something.
Yeah. So I just don't know anymore.
Okay.
All right. But let's talk about the behaviors and the actions of these plasma, because don't get me wrong, plasma floating around in the atmosphere, pretty cool. Chasing stuff, whatever. It's cool. But is. Like, I need a little something more. All right. So these plasma, like I said, they have been observed approaching the space shuttle windows. So not only do they see them from the space shuttle, but these balls will come up to the craft, the space shuttle, and appear to like look in a window.
No.
And then go a little bit down the ways and look in another window, and then keep looking and like just stopping at these windows. And it's like, that screams to me that it is sentient.
I was going to say that sounds like it's actually like setting out to understand or learn or
observe
explore.
Like it's not picking random spots on the craft. It's actually going to the windows and quote unquote looking in. Like, what is going on with that? The British Defense Ministry did a 30-year study on this stuff. And yeah, I know, right?
Okay.
We're just finding out year 7 of the podcast.
Yeah.
But they found a lot of the same things that I've already mentioned, that they can essentially just kind of appear out of nowhere and then vanish into nothing, more or less. They change direction suddenly. They can pivot on a dime, 45, 90, 180 degrees. They can accelerate from stationary to out of distance in a blink of an eye. Okay. So essentially what we would consider probably the speed of light.
I was going to say it sounds almost like it's probably going the speed of light. Basically.
Yeah, and no sonic boom that comes with it.
Oh, that's weird.
So, I mean, that's one of the things that people talk about when they see UFO. They're like, hey, I saw this thing on the horizon, and then it shot off in the blink of an eye, but there was no sound. Well, maybe there's no sound because it's plasma, I guess.
Right. Yeah, some form of physics we don't yet understand.
Yeah, so this is from the British study here. It says... they are comprised of several types of rarely encountered natural events within the atmosphere and ionosphere. The events are almost certainly attributable to physical, electrical, and magnetic phenomenon in the atmosphere, mesosphere, and ionosphere. The fact that the objects reportedly have the maneuver and acceleration attributes of an inertialess vehicle reinforces the hypothesis that they are buoyant, charged bodies. So they're saying the fact that they move around almost erratically means that they are buoyant, floating, of course, and charged. So they're attributing the movement to just like magnets, essentially.
And also, like, it's clear that they spent time crafting that sentence or whatever. So it's like, but the fact they also use the term or the word bodies. Uh-huh. Like it's, again, kind of its own thing.
It's weird, man.
It's an entity.
So these balls of plasma, they're self-organizing. They engage in complex behaviors similar to simple multicellular organisms. Their movement is described as fluid-like, much like a gas or a liquid might move. They accelerate in a straight line. They'll strike one another, turn 45 degrees, and accelerate towards another plasma. And individual plasmas can travel at dramatically different velocities, directions, and trajectories. Which, if you think about that, if you use the magnet analogy that I just mentioned, which isn't a perfect analogy, but sure. You know, if you have a giant fridge and a couple of magnets on the other side of the room, you let them go, the magnets are going to both go at the fridge, right?
Right.
But this is saying that they're moving at different velocities, directions, and trajectories.
Okay. So not necessarily even like a magnet, but almost like a magnet.
Almost like a magnet, but like lots of magnets in different directions, pulling things apart and together and all over the place. The other weird thing, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, they appear to be attracted to thunderstorms, which does line up more with like this is a charged body of, electrons, essentially.
Yeah, it's acting like we would expect electricity to act or something.
Right. But this was filmed. They filmed some of these balls of plasma going into a thunderstorm on the STS-96 and the STS-106. And these balls were, it's the Space Transportation System. That's what it stands for.
Makes sense.
Approaching, descending from the thermosphere into hurricanes and thunderstorms, and then they would shoot back into space. And the actual NASA write-up of this said, if you were to see this from the ground, it would look exactly like a UFO.
Ooh.
Interesting.
That's spicy.
Interesting.
Very spicy.
And a little bit more about the hunter-predator behavior, which just blows my mind. Because right away, when you say hunter-predator, you're immediately talking about two sentient, conscious things. Mm-hmm. One is trying to capture, one is trying to evade. So they clearly have their own motivations, and we're essentially personifying these plasma balls, which I am totally okay with because I'm still kind of the mindset where they might be alive. But anyway, they engage in what is called charge cannibalism. So they'll go and like swallow and take on another ball of plasma and essentially run around and consume these other balls of plasma. But the director of national intelligence issued a 9-page redacted report, Zach. And I know you remember this one. This was kind of a big deal. This was June of 2021, called the Preliminary Assessment Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon.
Okay.
We were all waiting for this thing to come out. The government was going to tell us everything they knew about UFOs and UAPs. Turned out it was a 9-page document, and it didn't really say a whole lot about much except, yeah, they're studying them, and yeah, there's a few things they can't explain. But now with this information in mind, you go back and read this, it's like, okay, so they see a lot of weird stuff.
Huh.
And they can't explain all of it, but it doesn't mean it is extraterrestrial or alien or a craft from a different dimension. Exactly.
This gets back to it not being craft from Zeta Reticuli.
Exactly.
But that doesn't mean it's not life, and it doesn't mean it's not.
I know. It's this weird line I'm trying to walk here. But the report, that 9-page report, said there were 120 incidents of, quote, extremely unusual aerial phenomenon, which I wonder how many of those 120 might fall into this category.
Yeah, no kidding.
But of those 120, they said none of them had any visible engine or infrared exhaust plumes, and these extremely unusual area phenomenon were capable of hypersonic speeds beyond the sound barrier without a sonic boom.
Okay.
And just kind of go, I have to go on to say, the movement and actions, according to NASA, according to everyone else, are not proof of intelligence. Rather, it appears to be automated and involuntary. Like every article, everything I read, it almost says it too much. If you know what I mean?
Yeah, dude.
I got my skeptical tinfoil hat on. It's like, well, if that's really the case, do you really need to beat me over the head with it? But it's kind of a good place to ask, like, what is life? What constitutes life?
Uh-huh.
So if you were to make a list of qualifications, and you don't have to think too hard because I do have the quote-unquote official list here, but I'm curious.
Well, this is where it's weird because we as humans associate, some level of like life with consciousness.
Yes, yeah.
And that's what's tough because you see some squirrels running around. They're clearly doing something that's intentional.
Yep.
But also they're not operating on the same wavelength we are.
Sure, but they're definitely alive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, there's been a lot of research into plants and how they communicate and push minerals to each other, all this weird stuff. Again, they're not operating on the same plane as we are necessarily, but there's something there to it. It's clearly life. It's growing. It's living, breathing, whatever. It's also communicating at some level. So like to me, it's kind of like that is whatever fits in that box is like what life is.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, plants, squirrels, all that is unequivocally alive. I think kind of what you were getting to is almost like, when does something have consciousness?
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah, which is a great, fascinating conversation I'd love to have. But so if you talk about like what, is the rock outside alive? Is my shoe alive? Probably not. So according to the Googles, there's seven different things life needs to have. But before I even read this, I have to say that we're looking at this with a very, very, what am I trying to say?
Probably traditional, viewpoint.
Yes.
Right? Which is...
Yeah.
Whatever we can observe here on Earth is what we think is life.
We can't even comprehend what else could be out there that could be alive. So in our mind, you need to have, it says a respiratory system. So some sort of breathing, oxygen, CO2, that sort of thing. It has to grow. It has to excrete something. It has to be able to reproduce, metabolize, movement, and be responsive to its environment. Okay. So if we start to look at these balls of plasma and we say, are they alive? Well, from a traditional Earth science, no, they're probably not. They're just balls of ionized electrons and atoms and so on and so forth, but they grow,
Yeah.
they move,
Yeah.
maybe they reproduce.
That's what it sounds like.
They certainly appear to be responsive to their environment.
Right.
So it's like, okay, well, if there's, we also say that you need to have oxygen and water in order to have life, right? We're looking at all these Goldilocks planets out there in the universe. You need to have oxygen. You need to have water.
Yeah.
Without it, you can't have life. Well, that's just the life we know, right? What if there's a silicon-based life form instead of a carbon-based life form?
100%.
What if they breathe methane instead of oxygen? You know, all that stuff. What if there is no breathing? What if it's just sentient balls of light?
Yeah.
I mean, who's to say? Why not?
Okay.
So part of me is like, maybe these things are actually alive if we just look at it with a different perspective.
Well, yeah, it's almost like, this definition fits specifically like life on Earth.
Right.
As we know it.
Right.
Anything beyond that, we just haven't figured out yet.
Yeah, because we haven't seen it. We
Yeah.
haven't been there. We
Yeah.
just don't know. We don't know what we don't know. All right, let's talk a little bit about NASA and the astronauts and some of the stuff that they've seen, because this is so bonkers. So, like I said, they have been visually seeing these plasma congregate by the hundreds around different satellites that are orbiting around the Earth. And as I said, they approach the space shuttle windows. And I have a clip here, about 30 seconds long. It's not the greatest thing in the world. It's from a 14-minute video from the STS-115 space shuttle flight in September of 2006, where they talk about some of the plasma that's approaching their ship here.
All right, here we go.
All right. Well, my apologies for the poor... Oh, actually, I don't apologize. Blame NASA for the poor audio quality on that. That's not on me. But you can kind of hear them talking about it, and they're like, oh, yeah, there it is. Yep, that happens sometimes. It's like, what is that? It'd be kind of like driving through Yellowstone, like a buffalo approaches your car. It's like, I get kind of excited. It's not like no big deal. Like, that's a freaking buffalo, right?
Yeah.
That was a weird analogy, but anyway.
No, but it works.
So
I know what you're
the
saying.
flight crew is talking about these plasma outside their shuttle, and is kind of summed up by the commander later on. I couldn't find an audio of this, but he said, the best way I can describe it is as some kind of a reflective cloth, some kind of a metallic looking type of cloth, a structure which is definitely not rigid. It's not a solid metal structure. That's how he tried to describe these. So he's like, it's opaque. It appears to have a boundary, like, edges.
Some form of structure, yeah.
But it's fluid, and it moves, and it gets bigger, and it gets smaller, and it flies away. It's like, what is that? All right. May 15th, 1963, Gordon Cooper said this is a quote, he saw a, quote, glowing greenish object that was rapidly approaching. I mean, that would freak me out.
Yeah, that's weird.
1963. It's like, okay, maybe that's why they had the delay on some of those NASA broadcasts, right?
Awkward.
June 1965, James McDevitt, Ed White said that they saw a metallic object approaching the Gemini orbiter. In December of 1965, James Lovell, he says, quote, bogey, 10 o'clock high. And then Houston says, this is Houston. Say again? Like, I'm sorry, what?
There's nothing there, right?
Yeah, right. And he says, and then they say, is that the booster or is that an actual sighting?
Oh, wow.
Which, yeah, we can parse that out in a moment. He says, we have several actual sightings. We also have boosters in sight.
Jeez. Okay.
So Houston's like, I'm sorry, what are you saying? He's like, oh, yeah, no.
There's something else.
There's a metallic object. It's weird. Astronauts definitively, exclusively across the board say that these objects, these plasma balls, whatever they are definitely not rigid. They're not a solid metal structure. Oftentimes they're more oval shaped, like a series of ellipses. Whatever that means. In February of 1996, the Columbia Space Shuttle was doing an experiment having to do with microgravity on electromagnetic pulses. Cool stuff.
Yeah. Super dense.
Cool stuff that NASA does, and I'm glad they do it. Anyway, but they went up into outer space, and they were orbiting the Earth, and they had a satellite on a tether behind them, and they were towing it along, and they were doing these tests. Well, the tethered satellite system broke. And they're like, oh, shoot. Okay, we'll keep doing whatever tests we can. So it broke at about 19 kilometers, but it was still transmitting 3,500 volts, even though it wasn't connected. And they were able to film this every 90 minutes. They would pass it as they made these trips around the Earth. The first few passes by this uncoupled tethered satellite, they didn't see anything. It was just sitting there blinking or beeping or doing whatever it did. But then about the third time around, they started to notice these pulsing bright lights that were starting to congregate around this satellite. And soon, on subsequent rotations, dozens and hundreds of pulsing orbs. One, they said, was up to 1 kilometer in size, and they were swarming, they were moving, they were changing directions, and they were interacting with each other and speeding up and slowing down. And the whole time, I mean, these are like the smartest scientists on the planet, essentially. Mm-hmm. They're observing this with their own eyes, with binoculars, with telescopes, with cameras. So this is like indisputable proof.
Right.
And still everyone's like, what? What is this?
No kidding. Well, what freaks me out is the fact that, like, right now you're reading quotes and what is, I guess I would call, like, objective science that has been going on for decades. And this is the first time I've heard of this stuff.
Thank you.
That's so weird.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. So again, everyone says plasma's not alive. Why? Well, one of the reasons they say is because it can't have DNA or RNA. And in order to be alive, you need a self-replicating genome. And in order to do that, that's DNA. And plasma obviously doesn't have DNA. However, Zach.
No.
Check this out. These plasma, when they're up there, they absorb or like, I guess that's the right word, take in the space dust, like particles, space particles, and it goes into the plasma. And if you look at it, just visually, it looks like, like you're looking at a high school biology textbook, like the old picture of a cell with the cell walls and a nucleus right there in the middle.
I'm assuming like a mitochondria or something, like absorb something into its cell walls, like that kind of a thing?
Exactly.
Huh.
So when space dust is incorporated in plasma, the plasma requires electronic charges, and it sucks in more electrons and positively charged ions, giving rise to plasma crystals, blah, blah, blah. But what it does is it starts to twist into a double helix shape.
No way.
Yes.
No.
So people are like, well, maybe it does have DNA. Like, look, it's a double helix. Like, how often does that occur in nature? And they're like, okay, well, just because it's a double helix doesn't mean it's DNA. It doesn't mean it's alive. And I'm just sitting here like, come on. Like, how much more do we really need?
No kidding. It checks all the other boxes effectively for life at some level. So here we go. Here's another one.
I just don't know. Okay, so I did say a lot, pretty much every single article talks about how these are not alive, trying to remind you that, which I maybe disagree. There are a couple scientists that say, well, I mean, if we start to rethink what constitutes life, they're not saying that these things could come down and like land on Earth and have a conversation with you and I.
Sure.
They're saying we have a much too narrow definition of what life is. Mm-hmm. And these could actually be what started life on this planet.
That is interesting. My mind is going in so many different directions right now. Because, like, part of me thinks also, okay, this sounds almost like maybe this is just how, like, this will sound like a real stretch, but new stars are formed. Yeah. Maybe after billions of years of these plasma flying around, absorbing all this mass. there is a new star, for instance.
Sure,
I know
right.
that sounds probably crazy, and there's
Actually, not to cut you off, like in that scenario, the star would exist first, most likely, and then solar flares would shoot the plasma off. So then they come into being. But anyway,
yeah, right. Like that's kind of
chicken egg, doesn't matter. Yeah,
that's kind of one thing. Okay, maybe wait a second, hold on. This is how life originated on Earth.
right.
Maybe
We don't know.
we don't know.
So I was thinking about this, and it reminded me of. Well, did you ever see Carl Sagan's Cosmos?
I never saw it.
Oh, it's so good.
Okay.
It's so good. It holds up, and it's still really, really good. But in the Cosmos series, Carl Sagan was hypothesizing what extraterrestrial life would look like on a different planet. And he's like, well, let's just pick a planet in our solar system. How about Jupiter?
Sure.
What would life look like on Jupiter? And he's like, okay, a giant gas planet like that, you're probably not going to have anything on the ground necessarily because it would be too much gravity and blah, 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 blah. So maybe there is life that lives in the atmosphere of Jupiter.
Yeah.
So he described this, he theorized this, and he came up with these three different, I'll call them animals, I guess. One of them.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So one of them would be, he called it a sinker. One of them is a floater, and one of them is a hunter. And each one, they all work into this ecology, I guess, of the Jovian gas giant. But sinkers would fall, and floaters would rise, and these scavengers would consume them. And here, let me just read this. So he says they would have the metabolic and photosynthetic parameters typical of terrestrial algae, but adapted to the Jovian environment. The best terrestrial analogy seems to be the surface of the sea. So he goes on, he says, the floaters and sinkers could obtain free energy from sunlight and would be filled with gas, which would provide buoyancy and a means of propulsion, thereby enabling them to move about and engage in various behaviors. And Sagan also hypothesized that these upper atmospheric hunters could grow to be as large as 1 kilometer in size, and they would chase each other and consume each other and just generally act a lot like how he describes the plasma that we're seeing in our atmosphere.
Well, so I saw Netflix had a series a couple years back where they basically were playing this hypothesis, this kind of, I don't know, almost like a thought experiment out, right? So they were saying, okay, if life were to exist on actually Jupiter, for instance, or Saturn, and they were saying this is likely what those animals would look like.
Yeah.
It was a little cheesy because it was kind of like just CGI stuff.
Yeah.
But the idea was pretty cool. And actually, now that I think about it, it's true, which is, you know, life could take on many different forms. It doesn't have to be, you know, bipedal or whatever.
Exactly.
It could be something entirely different. It could be plasma, for all we know.
I don't know.
It is. I'm telling you right now. I'm calling it.
Okay, so question one, is it alive?
You want to know my honest answer?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You think so?
Yeah, heck yeah.
You think it's alive and we just are classifying life too narrow?
Yes.
Okay.
100%.
Okay.
The other thing, too, is like just the fact that it sounds curious.
Yeah.
If that's the right word to use.
Going
here.
from window to window on a space shuttle, looking into the windows,
Yes.
basically.
Yes. To me, like, dogs do that.
Yeah.
Right? Cats, humans. It's like, okay, that sounds like something that's intentional, that's trying to learn. Like, I don't know what else to call that. It sounds like it's a living
maybe
thing.
it's all just different charges and chemistry and physics and stuff, but
Yeah.
at the end of the day, maybe everything is that also too. So I don't know. Okay, so I think we're both basically like maybe plasma in our atmosphere is alive, which is awesome.
Yeah, I really actually think that. I'm
Yeah.
not just like saying that for the show. Like, I think I believe
Which
that.
you would never do, of course.
Yeah, never. What? This is a show? We're taping this?
What?
Yeah, okay.
Is that why that camera's there? Okay, question two. What else have we talked about that might fall into this category now?
Oh, okay.
But I mean, you start thinking like ball lightning and like orbs.
Swamp gas. I
Swamp
guess.
gas,
Yeah.
exactly.
Actually, that sounds way more like it. But and the orb thing does sound very similar to this.
It does. You know, you have these, you talk about Skinwalker Ranch, when we did that episode, these orbs would fly out of the trees and like hover around someone's house and like go near them and then shoot off. It's like, okay, sure. Maybe it's some sort of extraterrestrial, interdimensional, what have you.
Yeah.
Maybe it's a ball of plasma.
From this thing.
From this thing.
Wait, quick question, side note, because Tim and I are both huge fans of the show Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. Yes. Awesome show.
Unironically awesome.
It is actually really awesome. Are you checking out season 4 right now?
So it just went on to Netflix.
Yeah.
And I started at 1.
Oh, you went back to 1.
Yeah, because
cool.
I haven't, because you gave me that spoiler and I kept like waiting. You're like, it's in the first episode. And I was like, what? Okay. No, anyway. So no, I'm still where they're doing like the acoustic, trying to open portals and you know, firing fireworks up in the sky. I'm just taking it all in, man.
Cool.
I want to watch every second of it. I don't want to skip ahead.
Same. But anyways, yeah. So some of the stuff they've observed there sounds almost like it could be like little balls of plasma from this.
That's what I'm saying.
From this life.
Life plasma.
I believe it.
All right, everybody. Well, thank you for listening. Thank you for making it all the way to the end. We appreciate it. And if you didn't know already, we got a Patreon.
We certainly do.
And on that Patreon, you can listen to every single episode we've ever done ad-free.
Yeah.
And where can they find that Patreon, Zach?
Patreon.com/crackpotpodcast.
And how can they get to that? By going to the website.
Yeah, crackpotpodcast.com.
Check it out.
Soon to be earth.com if we acquire that domain.
Crackpot.earth.com.
Yeah.
Earth.crackpot.com.
Anyways, you get
we'll figure it out. We'll figure it out in post.
Yeah, search for our show somewhere. It doesn't matter where. You'll find it.
You'll find it. It's good stuff. Anyway, check out the website. We got a bunch of cool stuff there. Check out the Patreon. Help support us. Keep us going. And guys, thank you so much. If you haven't already, please be sure to rate, review, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, tell your local astronaut about our podcast. And we'll see you next week.
Thanks, everybody.